Marco. I'm live from my house here during the COVID-19 crisis and working from home so that Tony and I can have more than 6 feet across from each other.
That's right. Gotta play it safe.
I know. It's a nice enough day that I get to sit outside and everybody's going to be able to hear the birds and the frogs and all the craziness that's over here.
You're definitely going to hear the frogs. I just heard them.
Yeah, they're loud. That's for sure.
Yep.
So what are we doing here today, Tony?
So we're getting close to the end of the series. So last week we talked pricing, kind of strategic price points and for purposes of retention. This week we're getting into the concept of, again, this is the retention series. So we've talked a lot as we went through the series about getting that feedback from users and how do we take that and make it meaningful and improve our product and improve our retention numbers based on that feedback. So we're going to take a closer look at feedback and kind of some places we can go with that.
Yeah, I think this is a core topic. I mean, we've been talking all about retention. There's been so many different, tips that are important. But at the end of the day, probably one of the most important ones is obviously go and ask your customers what they think and get real feedback, tangible information that can help you improve what you're doing. Yeah,
certainly. So just to jump ahead here and keep it moving, I think this first piece here is just to talk about the concept of, that customer feedback loop. So what we have here on the screen is kind of the process of what that looks like, the different steps in that feedback loop process. So you're going to ask for feedback, you're going to collect it, you're going to analyze the feedback. From there, you're going to take what you've learned, you're going to plan accordingly and then implement, and then you notify your customers, and it kind of happens again. So I would liken it, Andy, to, you've talked a couple times about the agile model of building. I think this goes right in line with that same concept of continuous feedback, improvement, adjustment, and so on and so forth.
Really, at the end of the day, agile development is this process, and they're not really too different, because the whole purpose of agile is to be able to gain feedback and make changes to your software roadmap and your actions based off of what you're learning from your application. And that could be data and analytics like we talked about previously, but a big part of it is probably the feedback piece, so that you can get the information, go through it, understand it, and in that analyze and plan, you're not looking just at analytical data, but also this customer feedback, so that you can make the changes and continue to evolve the application. What I think is interesting here that Agile we didn't talk too much about in the past is the notify and ask. One thing that's important is making sure you're communicating the changes that you've made to your software, and then really continuing that process of asking again and going through this in that cycle.
Yeah, and that's a good point there, the notify and ask. I mean, that goes to the point that we talked about communication, right? To consistently use every touch point, every opportunity to continue to communicate and clarify messaging. And that a lot of times is talking about different features, things in the work, updates, and then so that you can hopefully gain that reaction, the response, and grab that feedback. So a lot of these principles that we've talked about really tie together, are very closely related. But again, this is an essential one. Moving on here a bit, talking about just getting feedback at the right place and time. So this depends on your application. You're really going to want to get a sense of, when is the best time. There's probably different types of feedback to gather, but when you're looking for that very specific feedback in your application, right? So the example on the screen is an app, right? So an in-app feedback button. So someone, as they're utilizing it and they get stuck, they can give you feedback.
Yeah.
There's other ways too, emails and surveys. And Andy, you talk a lot about, surveying your audience, but I think that's something that you could certainly do for the purpose of understanding and retaining users, to get that feedback via, surveys and emails that get sent out asking for a response. And typically that kind of stuff is bigger more conceptual in nature, kind of more of what are people looking for, as opposed to the really specific, like in the app, like on this screen, this is giving me trouble, or I'm getting stuck. So two different kind of broad types of feedback you'll get.
Yeah.
You want to be showing up at the right place, asking the right questions. I think if you send an email out, asking someone about a very specific screen in an app, that may not really get great results, because someone may not be able to really understand what you're looking for, or kind of get that in the moment feeling. So there's a right place and a time, and that's important to get them at the right place and time.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic software out there that can, make this process easier. Be within your app. It really understands that if someone's been to your user screen 3 times, then, potentially pop up a message. Or even you can set criteria and say if someone's the owner of the account, they're going to get these questions. But if they're just a manager or a visitor, they're going to get these questions. And so you've got a lot of capabilities of really making the way that these surveys that pop up in-app or in your software be specific to the right person, the right time, based on different criteria, just so that you're not only, putting it in front of them when they're more likely to fill it out, but getting the right information based on their role or the way they interact with it.
Yeah, for sure. Those are sound of nature.
That's definitely a sound of nature. It's called the 4-year-old daughter. Yeah,
okay.
Out here dressed in princess garb, making it happen.
That's what I figured. Good stuff. So moving on, just to talk about the concept of gamifying the process, and I think this is an interesting one and an important one. There's so many people are using so many different types of software applications, et cetera, that the ones that can hook people and get people excited and interested, and those are the ones that are going to get people to come back more and more. So I think the idea of gamification has become more important. And if you're not familiar with gamification, do you want to explain to everybody what gamification is, Andy?
Yeah, it's really about giving people purpose behind, trying to get to different aspects of a software, whether that's, moving through, they're kind of earning points, getting the different levels, and there's so many different ways that it's executed. The one that we're seeing here with LinkedIn is that as you fill out parts of your profile, you're achieving and unlocking these different levels. This ties to our previous slide. I think that, as people get more in depth in the software, and they're, whether it's gamified or not, the more in depth that they get, you might want to ask different questions. And so this kind of pairs with that a little bit, is that it's really, talking about the progress that they're achieving as they go through the process.
Yeah, this type of gamification, again, crossover in the different topics and principles that we talked about. I think this ties in nicely when you're looking at the onboarding aspect, right? Because what this is doing is when people first sign up for LinkedIn, in this example, they see this screen and then they want to understand, okay, well, what does it mean I'm a beginner? And then kind of there's a prompt, kind of a wizard that walks people through to say, okay, now take this action next and you'll get to the next level. And then it takes them to the, on and on. And what you're doing is you're educating people so they have an understanding of what are the different features that are in here that I may not have just found on my own if I went about, just on my merry way and just tried to figure it out on my own. But this walks people through and gets them to better understand how they can utilize those things. And it's interesting how people are motivated by wanting to say, oh, I want to be an expert, saying I'm only an intermediate, I need to get to that. What else do I have to do, right? And so people go through and get through the steps. I recently, I'm a LinkedIn Sales Navigator user, and so my account, for a short period of time, it lapsed. And so I had been, an expert in LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And then when I renewed, it reset at beginner. So I started going through there, hitting the buttons, because I wanted to, show that expert status. It's weird. It's a little psychological thing that I just, I know what I'm doing in there. I don't really need that, but for some reason I do. So,
and that's what communication is all about, is the psychological side of things. People want to hit those achievements. And, one of the things with feedback is that I've actually seen, is to get to that next level. It kind of says, okay, you've completed all of this within this level, give us this type of feedback, and now you'll move up to the next. So you can even kind of incorporate the mixture of onboarding gamification with feedback gamification and make all of that happen to get more people to fill out, your surveys and stuff.
Yeah, it really works together, understanding the habits and what is valuable and interesting to people and gathering that feedback. So pretty cool. And then there's another example that we have here. We can move the screen just to get this out of the way. So this one here is a screenshot of, I believe it's the Starbucks app, and just how they use, these stars. It's like a point program, and they put out active offers so that, they're putting this out there and gamifying their offers. So there's so many different ways that you can use gamification. It takes some creativity, but I think to your point of using it, and if you're getting people to, take action in order to get something for that, some type of reward, if you make that feedback element part of that, what they're rewarded for, that's a great way to engage people and consistently get that feedback from those users, as well as introduce them to different features and kind of move them along the way.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that you can kind of see from this is giving people something back for providing feedback or getting the different levels. There's no reason that you can't give discounts or gift cards for gaining feedback. People do that all the time in the research and survey things. So looking at that whole thing of collecting stars and then what kind of offers you get back for it, kind of ties with that gamification. Every time you fill out a feedback survey on a screen, you could give points that eventually could be turned in for something. And so there's different ways to encourage feedback because the reality is that it can sometimes be challenging to get feedback. And so you need different ways to encourage it.
Yeah, we're going to look at that in a moment, kind of looking at the users. And, you're going to have all your users that are on your software, but not everyone's going to be willing to give feedback. And so we really want to encourage that behavior. So very good point that you can, kind of incentivize the process.
Right.
Get back here. All right. So kind of to that point, the idea of building a customer steering committee. And just as I was saying, you got if you look at the funnel, you got all of your customers up at the top, and then not all of them are going to move down, but you're going to have, a number that are going to be willing to provide you feedback. But then the willingness doesn't always translate, right? So the ones who are actually going to provide feedback, and then of that, the people who actually provide feedback, who provides the valuable feedback, right? Some people will just answer, if you give someone open-ended, field to fill out some feedback, it's, oh, this was awesome, and that's not that helpful, or it'll be negative. But the ones who can give the critical feedback that you can make sense of, analyze, and then plan out how you improve your software from there, that's the really valuable feedback that you're looking for. So you want to incentivize as many as possible to get into that funnel, take action, and participate. And then you'll have a better sampling of that feedback that has value.
Yeah, and that's what all those things that we just talked about is, presenting the right questions at the right time, gamifying it, including incentives. That's trying to get people pushed down to that valuable feedback stage. I think, to that point about having your questions at the right time and even targeted to the right criteria of audience, that helps you get valuable feedback. One of the ways that you end up with feedback that isn't valuable is presenting questions that are less relevant to a specific, audience or criteria or to features that they're less interested in. So when you look at this funnel, I think one of the ways to get to that green space is really making sure that you've come up with a good strategy around when do you present questions, which questions you present to who. The last thing you want to be doing is wasting people's time with things they're not interested in filling out, because next time when a valuable question comes in front of them, they're less likely because they've kind of been burnt from the process.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then kind of our last point for today's show is talking about, getting more specialized. So we're going through this feedback loop. We're capturing customer feedback. We're then figuring out what is the stuff that's valuable and what is not, filtering that out, and then understanding, okay, kind of synthesizing that and making sense of how do we plan from there. So what are the approaches we can go from, once we capture that customer feedback, what are the options there?
Yeah, I mean, once you've actually captured feedback, it obviously comes back to analyzing that. And I think, like we mentioned in the beginning, mixing your data that you're gathering from analytics with your feedback and really being able to analyze that, and then taking that and really incorporating that into your roadmap and how do you build it out. And then there are tons of different tools that can help you do that on a regular basis.
Yep. So that is a process. We went through this fairly quickly. It's not something that is executed in a quick fashion. There can be a lot to it, but I think having a well thought out plan and strategy for capturing feedback, knowing that there is going to be the stages in that feedback loop, and pulling and examining, analyzing, and then processing and implementing improvements and ways to continue the development and growth of your app is going to be really important for customer retention.
I totally agree. Even through the monsters that I've got running around here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we have one more episode in this series.
Yeah, one more, and then we'll do a recap of everything that we've been talking about. But don't until their bags are packed.
Yeah, it's a good one. So what's the concept there, Andy?
So really, it's a lot about making sure that you have some ways to try and have predictive information of whether people are likely to leave. And, one of those things that you can look at is tracking data in your app to understand, are people going to leave, other signals that come up. And so how do you identify those? And then what do you actually do to try and stop people that may be indicated that they're going to leave and churn? And so it's really that process of, the last thing you want to do is wait until their bags are packed and they're out the door. That is not the time to be trying to, keep the relationship.
For sure. No, that's I think a super exciting one. So I'm looking forward to diving into that one, kind of learning what those, key points to look for and examine. Super important. So analyzing your data is something that, there's so much to look at and there's so much to analyze, but if you can understand those key points that are related to retention, how do you get ahead of, addressing when the numbers are down or they're not where the benchmarks are? How do you get in front of it? So really exciting. So that'll be the 12th in our series. And as you said, we'll do one to recap, kind of go through, revisit everything. But until then, I encourage everyone to, if you have some time, you're cooped up, during this period, go back, revisit the other sessions and principles that we've gone through. We've also done our past series that was all on conversion. So conversion retention to kind of go hand in hand. If you haven't gone through that, some really good stuff in there. So with that, Andy, have a good one, and we'll be back here next week to go through that principle 12.
I don't know if I'll have all the frogs next time, but we should have fun. Have a good and safe day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
All right, bye-bye.